thank everybody for joining me. I do have slides prepared for my presentation. Before I do, I want to share with you a recent experience I had. I was recently at Loma Linda University Medical Center, Murrieta. I was there on a day when they were dismantling their auxiliary COVID intensive care unit. And I want to share that because it's really a metaphor for what we're going through now and looking ahead to. Because as they were starting to take down the temporary heating, ventilating, air conditioning system, take down the temporary walls, let the gift shop come back where it used to be and should be, on the one hand, I wanted to celebrate. I wanted to ask, where's the band? This is a happy thing. We're taking down this auxiliary temporary ICU because COVID numbers are down. We can start to look toward that light at the end of the tunnel. And then I thought of how many heartbreaks had occurred in that temporary unit. How many caregivers had traumatic emotional experiences, helping somebody say goodbye to a loved one on an iPad or a tablet. And how many times as they walk by that spot, those memories are going to come back to them. And that made it seem more inappropriate for there to be a band and a celebration. Maybe we just take it down without a lot of fanfare. And then the third thing that went through my mind is, what if we're doing this too soon? What if new variants come along? What if there's another spike? I certainly hope we don't have to put this up again. And to me, that's a metaphor for how we move ahead with culture in the post-pandemic era. On the one hand, I wanted to celebrate. And there's a lot to be appreciative of, a lot to be thankful for. We have seen incredible innovations in healthcare, haven't we? We have seen telemedicine progress faster in a year or two than it would have been in 10 years. We have seen all sorts of innovations when it comes to personal protective equipment. We've learned how to take care of this novel new disease. The vaccination programs have been ramped up with incredible speed in most places. We've seen fellowship in organizations. We've seen leaders emerge, people who maybe we never would have thought of as being a leader. And we've seen them take charge, proceed until apprehended. We've seen some incredible things happening that we want to capture. How do we not lose that spirit of fellowship, that sense of we got this? How do we not lose that appreciation for the frontline people who used to be called just a housekeeper, just a nurse's aide, just a grocery store clerk? For a while there, they were our frontline heroes. How do we make sure that in our culture, we remember that nobody's just a, that everybody in their own way is a superhero? On the other hand, how do we recognize the trauma? My friend Diana Handel, who some of you may know, she was formerly CEO of Long Beach Memorial, and they had a horrific employee shooting there. She's written several books about PTSD, including with Dr. Mark Goldston, one on post-COVID PTSD. And in their book, they said COVID was the earthquake. Widespread cases of PTSD among caregivers will be the likely aftershocks. And I think of it as COVID is like the comet streaking across the sky, pulling a long tail behind it. And that tail is personal grief. More than 500,000 families have been bereaved in this country alone. The emotional trauma that people have gone through. I've talked to nurses who zipped up more body bags in a week than in their whole previous career. The trauma of loneliness, not being, how long has it been since we've been able to actually hug somebody, to meet in groups? The financial and career dislocation that so many people have experienced because of the economic consequences of the pandemic. how do we heal our culture? How do we create more of a support group culture where we can help people move past the emotional impact of what we've been through? You know, before all this started, we were concerned about burnout. And now we're not talking about burnout as much as we're talking about PTSD. How do we make sure that our cultures are nurturing and caring? How do we help people re-spark and rejuvenate? How do we help people move on from this experience? And then, you know, I said that, the anxiety of maybe are we taking this thing down too soon? You keep hearing about this light at the end of the tunnel. And we all hope and pray vaccines are going to be the light at the end of the tunnel for the virus itself. But the light at the end of the tunnel is not going to be like a finish line of a marathon. We're not going to run through it and suddenly the race is over and now we can go have a beer or a Gatorade or whatever. It's more like a torch flickering at the end of the tunnel. A torch that it will be our obligation, our duty, our privilege to pick up and carry to illuminate the way for the people who are still in the tunnel behind us. And there are going to be a lot of people. It's going to take a long time. And to illuminate the way through the tunnels in front of us. We probably don't know what those tunnels are, but we know they're there. We know that staffing is going to continue to be a big problem, probably going to get a bigger problem soon. We know that a lot of people are going to struggle with the emotional consequences of the pandemic. We also know, as is the case with PTSD, that some of these things are going to sink in over a long period of time. PTSD doesn't happen immediately. Sometimes it takes months or years to really set in. So we know we're going to have these challenges. How do we create a culture of ownership where people have the emotional toughness, but where we support each other? And our commitment is that nobody goes home at the end of the day worse than they came in. You'll go home physically tired because we've been working hard, emotionally tired because we've been thinking hard. But at the end of the day, everybody goes home emotionally and spiritually uplifted because of the privilege of doing the work we do in healthcare. And so with that preamble, that quick story about my recent visit to your beautiful state, let me go ahead and share my screen and let's talk about building a culture of ownership in the post-pandemic era. And that is Loma Linda University Medical Center, Murrieta. And if you, prior to them taking down the temporary ICU, if you'd walked in that door, you'd have seen it on your left. So let's talk about building a culture of ownership in the post-pandemic world. Jacob said we'll have Q&A after. And if you have questions, either use the chat room, raise your hand, or Annie Tai, Dr. Annie Tai is with me in our office today. And you can send her an email at Annie@ValuesCoach at any time. She's going to be evaluating questions that come in and decide whether it's a question to save for the end, or if it's something that is relevant to what I'm covering right now. She'll just holler at me from across our office. We're all cubicles here. And we'll stop and we'll talk about it. So feel free, if there's something that you really think I should cover, or if you have a question that you want me to pause for a minute. I never do this, but today let's make it more conversational. So the World Health Organization designated the year 2020 as the International Year of the Nurse and the Midwife. And it turned out to be a whole lot different than we thought it would be, didn't it? And I guess officially it's been extended into 2021. Frankly, I think this will be the decade of the nurse. This recent year, nursing for, I believe it was the 19th year in a row, with one exception, nursing was honored as the most trusted profession in America. The one exception right after 9/11, it was firefighters, and nursing was number 2. I think nursing has a lifetime permanent lock on that designation because of the way nurses and caregivers, all of us have risen to the occasion during this incredible, difficult period. And if you were on my last webinar, I shared this picture, and I will share a few other things by way of review, but this picture absolutely haunts me. Because what are the emotions reflected in that caregiver's face? And it could be exhaustion. She could be looking at the schedule for tomorrow and saying, I can't do another 12 or 14-hour shift. It could be fear. She could be looking in the supply closet and saying, you mean I have to use the same face mask again tomorrow? I'm worried about my family, my health, my safety. She could also be praying for a patient, couldn't she, with that expression? Or she could be looking at a brand new nurse who's doing something right and with great pride saying, you finally got it. And the reason I find this picture so impactful is because it conveys that whole range of emotions that all of us have been feeling during this pandemic. We've all experienced anxiety and fear. I had one chief nurse executive tell me that West Point, the military academy, would have been better preparation for what they were going through than nursing school ever was. We've all experienced exhaustion. We've also all experienced the fellowship, the teamwork, the way we've come together during this pandemic. And it's this whole swirl of emotions that we need to be cognizant of. One of the take-homes I'm going to give you is our project Stay Strong for Us. I asked over 100 healthcare leaders, authorities in well-being and wellness, motivational speakers, to submit a message of hope and encouragement and resilience. And we put it together in this beautiful ebook. It's at staystrongforus.com, and it's all free. And one of the contributors was Kit Redimus. Kit is the Chief Nursing Officer at Midland Memorial Hospital in Midland, Texas. And what he said in his message, and again, it's one of over 100, while everything around us collapsed, and you all experienced that, nurses remain courageously and caring for patients at the bedside during the most vulnerable hours of their lives. And if you look at this picture that is the backdrop here, those two nurses, they're standing beside an empty ICU bed, and you can be pretty sure that it's not empty because the patient got up and walked out. And we've experienced heartbreak after heartbreak, and yet we continue to, as Kit said, rise to the occasion and put our patients first. And I want to share with you what I think is the ultimate paradox in life, because it's so important. And that is this: whatever you most need at any time in your life will be hardest for you to find at precisely the time you need it the most. It's easy to be motivated when things are going great. It's when the roof is falling in on you that it's hardest to find the motivation to get up, get out of bed, and go do what you have to do, to take the risk you have to take. It's easy to have courage when your fears are small. It's easy to persevere when you're going over little speed bumps. It's easy to have integrity when you have no temptation. It's easy to commit yourself to serving other people when you have everything you need yourself. It is when you don't have what you need. It's when you're facing monstrous fears. It's when you run into brick walls and not speed bumps that is hardest for you to find those inner qualities. And just like preparing for any athletic event, if you wait until you need it to have the courage, to have the determination, to have the integrity you need to have in those challenging situations where you're under trial, it could be too long. And the same thing applies to a culture. If you wait until you need it, it might be too late. Admiral Eric Olson wrote an article in the McKinsey Quarterly on the war on the coronavirus. And he said, culture must not be sacrificed in the middle of a crisis. If you don't tend to your culture, it's going to go someplace you as a leader don't want it to go. And once it goes to that unintended place, it is very difficult, if not impossible, to get it back. We have seen this with the hospitals that we've worked with and communicate with. I'm sure you've seen it in your organization as well. We have seen organizations that have gotten stronger as a result of what they're going through. Their cultures have gotten stronger. We've also seen organizations where they've gotten weak. They're struggling, and they might not ever get back to where they were before. And I want to share with you what I think are the two prevailing myths about culture change. One is there's this notion that culture really doesn't change, that you can have programs of the month and all that, but the culture is what it is. I took this picture 4 or 5 years ago. I was in Vietnam. Now, when I was in high school back in the 60s, they say if you can remember the 60s, you must not have been there. The word Vietnam was always postceded by the word war. And as my friend Kian Pham, who's from Vietnam, points out, Vietnam is not a war, it's a country. But back then, it was the Vietnam War. And the statue you see in the foreground is a statue that was constructed back then to their war heroes. And the billboard in the background is a contemporary commercial billboard promoting cell phones. The culture of that country has changed so profoundly, so radically. They have gone from being a country shattered by war to being one of the most entrepreneurial cultures on earth. It didn't happen overnight, but it happened a whole lot more quickly than any of us would have thought as the war was going on and in the years afterward. And it is a relatively permanent change. So anybody who says to you, you can't change your culture, say, well, yes, we can. It's been done. It's been done in organizations. It's been done in nations. And we need to change our culture here. The second myth is that culture takes a long time to change. You often hear it's like turning an aircraft carrier or a battleship. Well, today's aircraft carriers, as you see in this picture, can turn on a dime. They turn very fast. Culture can change very, very quickly. Unfortunately, most very quick culture changes are for the worse. It's easy to make your culture worse almost overnight. A layoff will do it. Give everybody a big pay cut, and give the CEO a huge bonus. That's going to affect your culture quickly and in a negative way. We have also seen examples of culture changing in a positive way. And some of the strategies that I'll share with you today are ways that you can do that, can have a positive and an expeditiously positive impact on your culture. And I love this picture because it really captures healthcare, what healthcare is all about. It is both left brain and right brain, isn't it? The stethoscope is the technical skills that are required to be an excellent clinician. The heart is the soul is the inner compassion and empathy that's required to be an excellent caregiver. And those two things together, the clinician and the caregiver, the left brain and the right brain, the creative and the analytical, have to support each other. In healthcare, paradoxically in healthcare, we have been significantly overweighted on the left brain side for a long time. I have 2 master's degrees. I have a master's degree in healthcare administration from the University of Iowa, and I have an MBA from the Stanford Graduate School of Business. 4 years of graduate education focused on healthcare. I took entire courses on how to do spreadsheets for profit and loss, how to calculate EBITDA, earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization, if I recall correctly. I took classes on measuring, on statistics, on economics. I never took one single class on courage. Not one single class on hope. I never took a class, frankly, in 4 years back then, I'm older than most of you. Back then, we never talked about culture. 4 years of graduate education and the word culture almost never came up. And today we have this acute realization of how important it is, but we still have this mindset. Well, what gets measured gets done. If you can't measure it, it's not important. We got to hold people accountable. And that thinking can be, when it comes to culture, can be so counterproductive. And we have several guiding insights behind our work at Values Coach that are you should have them too. Insight number one, everybody talks about changing culture. Culture does not change unless and until people change. Because the culture of your organization or your department, or for that matter, your family, the culture of any organization is shaped by the collective attitudes and behaviors of the people who work there. And if nobody's willing to change, if everybody's doing this thing, yeah, we need to change, but it's not me, I'm fine, it's everybody else, then you can have motivational speakers and give everybody a book and a happy face pin. And a month later, it was a program of the month, the happy face pins are upside down and the books are lying on bookshelves unread. When enough people look in the mirror and say, I can do a better job, I can be a better employee, I can be a better friend. When enough people are willing to check their own attitudes, their own behaviors, and make personal change, then you can change your culture in a positive and permanent way, but not until then. But our second insight is that change is hard. And people will not change unless you give them a new approach. Give them some new ideas, a new technique, a tool they can use. Give them the inspiration to try something different. We have all tried to change and failed, haven't we? You know, the New Year's resolution that showed up dead on arrival. This is the year I'm going to get out of debt, lose weight, get my doctorate, whatever it is, write a book. And a year goes by and we haven't done it. And that's a pretty good definition of insanity, isn't it? Doing the same thing over and over and expecting somehow a different outcome. And by that definition, most of us are at least a little bit crazy. And the third insight that guides our work is the late, great Zig Ziglar, the motivational speaker, said, everybody listens to the same radio station, WIIFM, what's in it for me. And for us, it's not what's in it for me monetarily or professionally. The best way to inspire people to make the changes they have to make for you to create the kind of culture you want is to help them be better people. Help them do a better job of being clear about what their values are, how to live their values, how to be a better parent. Show someone how to be a better parent, and they'll be a better caregiver almost automatically. Show them how to manage their own goals, and they're much more likely to embrace the goals of the organization. I got a letter from the CEO of a hospital in Nebraska, Paul Udemark. He said, I got a whole new team and didn't have to change the people because they changed themselves. Now, I have not been to Fillmore County Hospital myself in 6-7 years probably. The 12 core action values is still prominently displayed around their hospital. They still do the pickle pledge, the self-empowerment pledge, all the things that we help them do. Paul himself passed away tragically years ago, but even with him being gone, their culture, the changes they've made have been permanent. Why? Because enough people embrace them at a personal level. And that gets me to this journey from accountability to a culture of ownership. Let me ask you to imagine this. We're going on a river trip, and our guide there on the back of the boat, we've been out on the river. It's a beautiful sunny day. We pull over on this white sandy beach, and the guide comes around and he says, are you having a good time? Oh yeah, this is great. And he says, well, don't get too complacent yet because the real adventure hadn't started. It's around the next bend. We get back out on the water and suddenly it's going faster and rougher. And then we drop down into this maelstrom of white water. And our guide there in the back of the boat hollers out, hang on, folks, this is it. The Class 5 rapids I've warned you about all week long. Everybody grab a paddle, dig in, and paddle for your life. And this guy in the back here says, I don't paddle. That's not my job. What do? And whenever I've showed this, shared this in a live audience, people know you throw them out of the boat. If you're in Class 5 rapids, it doesn't matter what your name tag says. It doesn't matter what your job description is. You pick up a paddle and you do your part. That's what a culture of ownership is all about. Let's do another river trip. Imagine that you are the captain of this beautiful galley ship, and it is your job to get it across the water on time, on budget, with your cargo intact. And you have 100 people at the oars. And of those 100 people, 25 of them believe in the values, believe in the mission. They're putting their backs into the work because they're behind you. 60 of them just going through the motions. Another day, another dollar. Work sucks, then you die. And 15 of those people are actually rolling backwards, interfering with the progress of the boat, calling the hard workers, the 25%ers, nasty names like overachiever, quota buster, brown nose, or apple polisher. How many ways do we have to tell somebody to stop trying to be outstanding and be mediocre like all the rest of us? Would you be proud to be the captain of that ship? And I know if you're on this call, your answer is going to be no. This is not what a leader aspires to. How would you feel if you were one of the 25%ers? How would you feel about the 60%ers just getting by and the 15%ers making your work harder by not doing their part and trying to make you feel bad for wanting to do that? And how would you feel about them? How would you feel about a leadership team that tolerated a situation like that? And unfortunately, that is a picture of the average American organization today. In fact, globally, Gallup, Press Ganey, Avatar, my company, every organization that studies employee engagement one way or another finds pretty much this pattern. 25% of people are highly engaged, 60% are not engaged. That doesn't mean they're doing a bad job necessarily, but it's just a job, and at quitting time, they're out of there. And 15% are aggressively, toxically disengaged. Now, there's obviously a huge range. We have worked with hospitals where nobody's disengaged. It's 100% green bar, from the CEO down to every housekeeper. We've worked with hospitals where it feels like nobody is. Even in the executive office, they're waiting for the phone to ring from a headhunter with a better job somewhere else. We have worked in hospitals where one department, everybody's engaged. They show up every day with their hard hat, their lunch pail, metaphorically, and they go to work with their A game. 3 doors down, seems like nobody's engaged. And the question is, where do you fall? Where does your hospital, your long-term care organization, where does your department fall on this scale? And a more important question is, what are you going to do to move the yellow bars into green and to move the red bars either into yellow or off to your toughest competitor to get a job there? Those highly engaged people, those are the spark plugs that make your organization go. Tell me, what do you call a car with no spark plugs? Dead. A lawn ornament. What do you call an organization that has no spark plug people? Everybody just going through the motions, doing a job. And in many ways, it's just as dead. And then you have the zombies. Another day, another dollar. Is it quitting time yet? Is it retirement time yet? And this is the real problem. The emotional vampires. The people who, with a look, with a crossing their arms, with a few words, can suck the joy out of the work. They can suck the energy out of the workplace. They can suck the life out of everybody around them. And one of your biggest challenges as a leader is to not allow these people to contaminate your workplace. You might be old enough to remember when people smoked everywhere. Airplanes, your hospital, your nursing home, you couldn't see across the cafeteria for all the smoke. What would happen today if somebody lit a cigarette on an airplane? They'd be shown to the exit, even if they don't have a parachute. We have become absolutely intolerant of somebody polluting our workplace with physical contaminants. Toxic emotional negativity is a metaphorical equivalent of cigarette smoke in the air. One toxic negative person walking into a room, well, this really sucks, why do we have to do this? They can pollute the emotions of everybody else in the room. Jim Clifton, the CEO of Gallup, wrote a very disconcerting book, The Coming Jobs War. You think we've had challenges before. The next couple of years, the jobs war is going to accelerate like we've never seen. And in that book, he said a disengaged employee, especially if it's a disengaged manager, is a quality defect. Just like giving a patient the wrong medication, just like shipping the wrong product out the door. Somebody who's disengaged reduces the quality that you owe your patients, your community, and each other. And that's heartbreaking, but even worse is the impact on the disengaged employee, his or herself. Edward Hallowell, one of the most thoughtful psychiatrists in America today. He's written some of the best books on ADD, like Driven to Distraction, best books on anxiety, book on toxic worry. He wrote an article in the Harvard Business Review about employee disengagement, and he said it's one of the chief causes of underachievement and depression. And think about it. Think about the people you know who are the least disengaged. I'll bet you anything. They're also the ones, their life's not working, they're over their head in debt, their relationships aren't working, and they don't have good days. They're depressed every day. And Hallowell says they have cause and effect reversed. See, they're blaming their miserable life on the job they hate. And he says the reason their life is miserable is because they hate the job. And if they would get up in the morning, put a smile on their face, put on their hard hat, and go to work with a bit of gumption, we'd use a whole lot less antidepressants in this country. And he's not opposed to using antidepressant or anti-anxiety medication. He prescribes it when it's appropriate. But he said a lot of people are just trying to medicate away their unhappiness because they don't have the gumption to get up and go to work and take the risk they have to take. This is a CEO in training, and it always gets a laugh with a live audience, and I hope you get a laugh too, but I imagine you also recognize that expression as being some of the people that you work with. So let's talk about accountability. Accountability is actually a very low bar, isn't it? Accountability is doing what you're told to do, doing what's in your job description, and you're motivated by the promise or the threat of reward and punishment. It's the motivation of the carrot and the stick. Ownership is a much higher bar. Ownership is doing what needs to be done, even if it's not in your job description, because you expect that of yourself. It comes from the intrinsic motivation of personal pride. And in a culture of ownership, in a healthcare organization, everybody has the same job description. First and foremost, a caregiver. You probably, if you work in a hospital, you've had experiences of a patient saying, the housekeeper came in and helped raise my day, raise my spirits. You may know about a housekeeper. I met one 2 weeks ago at a hospital who sings for patients. And that's every bit as important a caregiving skill as doing a temperature check. Last but not least, the janitor. In a culture of ownership, somebody walking down the hall does not step over a piece of paper on the floor. They don't walk by a stained ceiling tile. Why? They know that the reason the ceiling tile is stained is because of a water leak. And what do water leaks cause? Safety hazards. So they don't walk by, they do something in between whatever else needs to be done. And never saying those awful 3 words, not my job. Nobody ever checks the oil in a rental car. Why? There's no pride of ownership. I rent cars a lot. I've never checked the oil. I've never washed or waxed. I only do the minimum required because I have no pride of ownership in that rental car. And think of the word accountability. It means able to be counted. And especially in healthcare, how do you count the things that really matter? How do you measure compassion? How do you count pride? And there's a real problem with a culture that's too focused on accountability. Campbell's Law states that anytime you try to quantify any measure, people will begin to game that measure. This is one of the reasons why so many patient satisfaction programs fail to improve HCAHPS, because the focus is on HCAHPS. Nobody goes home at the end of the day and talks to their family about how proud they are because, hey, we improved our HCAHPS by 10%. HCAHPS is always a trailing indicator of the culture of your organization. And as I said, you can't hold somebody accountable for the things that really make a difference in healthcare. And, you know, we need more words in the English language, don't we? I love my wife. I love hot dogs. I love hiking in the Grand Canyon. Those are 3 very different things, even though I use the word love for all 3. And it's the same thing with accountability. And if you're going to use the word accountability to describe your culture, your organization, your management style, you need to be very clear about what are you talking about when you use that word. And there's really a continuum, a pyramid, if you will, of levels of accountability. And at the bottom, this is what most of us mean when we say, I'm going to hold you accountable. We have a culture of accountability. It's top down, boss to subordinate, parent to child, reward and punishment, carrot and stick accountability. And think of the metaphor we use. I'm going to hold your feet to the fire. I'm going to crack the whip. Ladies and gentlemen, those are forms of torture used in the Middle Ages, and now we use them to describe accountability. No wonder if I say I'm going to hold you accountable, people take a step or two back. Mark and Bonnie Barnes, I'm sure you know, the founders, co-founders of the Daisy Foundation here at Children's Hospital New Orleans with a 3-time winner. And they tell me no one ever won a Daisy Award by doing what was in the job description, by doing something they could have been held accountable for. More than 2 million people have been nominated for Daisy Awards. And every single time it was somebody going above and beyond that minimum level of accountability. Now, a much higher level, a much more powerful level is cultural accountability. That is us holding each other accountable. That is you holding my feet down while I do sit-ups and encouraging me on. And you know, it's far more powerful. When somebody says, we don't talk about colleagues behind their back because that violates our integrity, that is far more effective than being called into the boss's office 3 days later. I hear you've been talking about Mary behind her back, isn't it? This is why nobody smokes in your hospital anymore. You don't need no smoking signs anywhere, and it's probably been years since you had to ask someone to put out a cigarette. Why? Because we hold each other to that standard. And when you create a culture of ownership where we all hold each other to that higher standard, you'll need to use hierarchical accountability a whole lot less. And the highest level is personal accountability. I don't talk about people behind their back because I care about my integrity and their dignity. And here's the metaphor we use. Willing to walk across hot coals. And if somebody's willing to walk across hot coals on their own, you don't have to hold their feet to the fire, do you? Florence Nightingale wrote from the Crimea to her friend Hilary Bonham Carter. This is one of her most frequent quotes. She said, I attribute my success to the fact I never gave or took any excuse. That is thinking like an owner. That is holding yourself accountable. And if you do that, then the other levels take care of themselves. My friend Bernie, reading my book, the most important 3 words in the book, The Florence Prescription, and you see them up here behind me, proceed until apprehended. We need to see opportunities where other people see barriers. We need to be cheerleaders as leaders when other people are only seeing the worst in the world. And we give organizations we work with a banner to post on proceed until apprehended. And when it becomes a part of your culture, you will find people taking initiative. Now, I posted something the other day about my good friend Kit Bredimus, the Chief Nursing Officer at Midland Memorial Hospital, and their commitment to proceed until apprehended. And I posted it on LinkedIn, and somebody sent a note, can you tell me more? What do you mean by proceed until apprehended? And here was my answer. Proceed until apprehended means replacing learned helplessness, I can't do anything about that, with taking initiative, and replacing resentment, always complaining, with a spirit of gratitude. It means that if you see something that needs to be done, you do it. And if you can't do it yourself, you get help. If you need to get someone to give you a go-ahead, you go talk to them, and if they say no, you say, wait a minute, I don't accept that. This needs to be done. Tell me how I can do it. It means replacing not my job with how can I help, and really meaning it, not just saying the words. It means confronting the bully, confronting the emotional vampire, when it's much easier just to turn around and pretend like you didn't see it. And it means giving a coworker a hug. When they say, I'm fine, and you know they mean I'm frustrated, insecure, negative, and exhausted. It means giving them a hug and not just saying, I'm fine too, and keeping walking. Now, here's a guy who's got a dream. He's got a goal, and he's got that proceed until apprehended mindset. And what is he about to run into? I once had somebody in a live audience say, disappointment. I thought, well, there's an understatement. And somebody else raised their hand and said, if he keeps digging, they're not going to follow him. And that's the thing. When this becomes a part of your culture, people are willing to take a risk. They're willing to make a decision. You need leadership in every corner, not just in the corner office in today's complicated, ambiguous world. And you need people like this who are willing to dig and to keep digging even when they run into obstacles. And so let's talk about the invisible architecture of your organization. When I come into any hospital, my first impression is created by the bricks and mortar, isn't it? It may be beautiful, but that's not my lasting impression. If I spend 4 days in this hospital and someone asks me, how was your stay? I'm not going to talk about the carpeting and the wallpaper and the beautiful glass facade. I'm going to talk about how was I treated. I'm going to talk about how did you make me feel? Even if you didn't fix my problem, did you help me heal myself? Now, I saw this picture this morning on LinkedIn. This is Rady Children's Hospital, and the walls you see are cardboard. And this is a really smart thing to do, isn't it? They have built cardboard rooms and moved furniture into it. They're moving the stuff around, make sure everything fits. That's a really smart thing to do. We do that with our visible architecture, don't we? We hire architects, interior designers. We put masking tape out in parking lots and move stuff around. We put up cardboard walls. And then the beautiful new building opens up and we move in the same old culture, the same old attitudes, the same old relationships. And we have seen time and again where people think opening a brand new building is going to make patient satisfaction go up, and it actually goes down. Because you raise expectations with this beautiful new building and you move in the same old experience, and the gap between higher expectations and same old treatment gets even bigger. And when it comes to the things that really matter, employee engagement, patient satisfaction, invisible architecture is more important than bricks and mortar. We call it the blueprint behind the blueprint. And in a very real sense, it is the soul of your organization, the way bricks and mortar are the body. Now, when you build a building, you build it in 3 stages. You put down a solid foundation, you build a superstructure on top, and you come in and finish it off with carpeting and wallpaper. And we use that as a metaphor for invisible architecture. And what I'm telling you is that as detailed as your physical architecture plans are, you start with a rendering and schematics and then design drawings, and finally you have construction documents. You should put the same kind of thought and documentation into your invisible architecture. And so let's look at this metaphor a little more carefully. The foundation is core values. You should have a statement of core values that defines who you are, what you stand for, and what you won't stand for. I was at an airport a while back. I had a long time for my next flight, so I went to the Hudson bookseller. I wanted an energy bar. They had 2 kinds, Power Bar and Cliff Bar. I had enough time to go back to the waiting area and look them up. So I Googled Power Bar core values, Cliff Bar core values. I got to Power Bar, and it's We Are Power Bar, and that's literally what it was. It was all about us. We are great. We are wonderful. We have revolutionized the energy bar industry. It was all about us. I Googled Cliff Bar values, and they said, we don't have values, we have aspirations. We want to make the world a better place, and we have 6 of them. And it starts with a different kind of bottom line, but then it talks about sustaining our people, our communities, our planet. And if you click on each one of those boxes, it takes you to a detailed list of all the things that they've made commitments to. I bought a Cliff Bar. I happen to like Power Bars better, but now I always buy a Cliff Bar if I have a choice between the 2, because I care about the values of the company that I'm buying things from, and people will do the same thing when they make decisions about where they go for health care. And here's the problem with many value statements. I'm guessing probably many of the people on this call, they're generic. I can't tell you how many hospitals have force-fit words into eye care, and you can pretty much guess what the words are. And there's a real problem with generic statements of values. One, they do not differentiate you from everybody else who's got the same values. Who doesn't claim integrity or excellence? What healthcare organization would say, oh, compassion, well, that's really not a value for us. That's just sort of something we do. Eye care does not differentiate you from any other hospital, for that matter, any other organization. Don't banks and gas stations claim to care about these things. If I'm having a bad day in a hotel and I go down to the bar at night, I want compassion from the guy who's serving me my cold beer. Problem number 2, that's a very low bar for expectations. Of course, people expect this from you. They want to know, how are you going to go above and beyond this minimum standard of eye care? And third, you may think that by giving it a silly acronym like eye care or whatever, you're going to help people remember them. But I'm pretty sure if you go around and tap people on the shoulder and say, what are our values? Most people aren't going to know. The acronym, the genericness, the silliness doesn't really work. Now, we were working with 2 hospitals in Wyoming that both had eye care as their values on either side of the state, east and west. And I challenged them. We called it the Great Wyoming Values and Culture Challenge. And one of the challenges was to rewrite your statement of values. They each used a very different process. They each came up with a very different statement of values. But on the left, my left, Memorial Hospital of Converse County, in the eastern part of the state, very much a blue-collar, mining-based. They're very much a kind of a linear thinking community and organization. Their statement of values reflected that. Star Valley Medical Center on the west side of the state, in the mountains as a backdrop, a lot of outdoors people, a very different statement of values, but each one of these is a much better reflection of who they are and what they stand for than the previous eye care that nobody knew, the plaque on the wall. And both organizations use this for evaluations. They use it for recruiting. They use it for telling people this is what we stand for. And I think there's some really important lessons here. One is, don't give in to just the boilerplate. Make sure that it really is you. But 2, when you design a building, you want to make it beautiful. Do the same thing with your statement of values. Create something that is visibly attractive to people. I want to share with you 5 of my I read a lot of statements of values, and 5 of my favorites, none of them from healthcare. Integrated DNA Technologies has 8 core values, one of which is be yourself unless you're a jerk. ClickStop, another Iowa-based company, expect greatness in yourself and inspire it in others. ClickStop is one of the fastest growing companies in Iowa, and year after year they're rated as one of the best places to work. They have 6 core values, not one of which has to do with building a business. They're all about being a better person. DataRobot, an artificial intelligence company in Boston, they have 11 core values, one of which is build sincere friendships and relationships. Most of us talk about that. And they add even when it's hard. Of course, you probably know Zappos. They have 10 core values, one of which is create fun and a little weirdness. And then a Silicon Valley company, Cypress Semiconductor, they say we don't have the typical Silicon Valley culture, laid back, beer bashes, bring your puppy to work. Nope, we're all about winning and we don't tolerate losing. Their CEO wrote a book called No Excuses Management. They call themselves the Marine Corps of Silicon Valley. Now, I would not be happy working there, but they are so very clear about who they are and what they expect, they never make hiring mistakes. And back to our paradox, living values is hardest to do when it's most important. And in the last couple of years, hospitals have been under tremendous economic strain. Many have resulted to furloughs, layoffs. I got an email from Rose Sherman, the editor of Nurse Leader, shortly before the pandemic started. And she said, I wonder if you could write an article about living your values, because I'm hearing from so many young nurses that they're not seeing their leaders live values. So I did a survey responded to by several thousands of healthcare people, and only 2 in 10 strongly agreed that their senior leaders don't just talk about the values, they set high expectations through their own example. I want to give you a real world example. I mentioned hospitals that have been through furloughs and layoffs. Last week, I was in Midland, Texas at Midland Memorial Hospital. And they had to shut down, as many did, shut down most of their elective procedures for a long time. Rather than laying people off like the surrounding hospitals all did, they put their perioperative people to work making face masks. They went around the world. They went on eBay. They shipped in material and elastic from Singapore. They were relentless, and they made 10,000 some face masks. Instead of laying people off, they put them to work. And what do they call it? Chris was the manager. They called it Chris's Sweatshop. They took something that could have been a real downer, and by living their values, one of which is caring heart, they showed their employees they really do care. They really do live their values. So here's a question for you to take home and ponder. I'll bet you have seen some values reflected in your organization that are not tacked up on the wall or on the website, haven't you? I bet you have seen resilience like never before. I bet you have seen a spirit of fellowship and teamwork. I bet you're more concerned about self-care than you ever have been before. I'm sure that you're more concerned and have seen more courage in the last 2 years than ever before. Wouldn't this be a good time for you to pull the plaque off the wall and really think about who are we? What have we shown in the last 2 years? And put some of those qualities, those virtues into your statement of values and make it permanent. Now, on that foundation of core values, the superstructure is culture. My definition, very simple, it's the personality and the character of the organization. The Greek philosopher Heraclitus said, character is destiny. For the organization, culture is destiny. Peter Drucker, the man who invented modern management, famously said, culture eats strategy for lunch. And think about it. Go down the list of organizations that you most admire. They're all in the same business, but I'll bet you anything, the companies you admire are all on the left side. And it's not because they're doing business different. It's not because they have different strategies. It's more than anything because of their culture. Costco and Walmart are in the same business. What makes them different is their culture. When Business Week wrote a cover story on Costco, they wrote about ecstatic employees. I don't know about you, but I've never heard Walmart accused of having ecstatic employees. People pay to shop at Costco. You have to buy a membership. People shop at Walmart because they don't have to dress up like they do for the dollar store. Southwest Airlines and United Airlines, again, same business. They fly the same planes. What makes the experience of working for or flying with them different, so profoundly different in many cases, is their culture. And here's a tool that I'm going to share with you to take home. At the end of the presentation today, I'm going to give you several homeworks. One of them is our book, the Cultural Blueprinting Toolkit Workbook. And one of the tools in that book is the Culture Mapping Wheel. This is what it looks like. You start in the middle with an assumption that you would like to build a culture of ownership, and the question why. What are the qualities that we want to develop? And then the middle ring is what are the characteristics we have to work on to build that. And if you've read my book, The Florence Prescription, it's the 8 essential characteristics of a culture of ownership. And then on the far outer ring is what are the specific strategies that we have to work on to build those. There's no right or wrong pathway. In fact, if my math is right, there's 693 potential pathways through. The power of this tool is it makes you focus on one thing instead of trying to do everything all at once. So, for example, you start with the middle ring and say, the thing we most want to work on now is relationships. How can we do that? Anything in the middle ring will help you build better relationships. You say, if our people had greater pride in their work, their organization, that would help us do that. And then anything in the outer ring will enhance pride. We, being values coach, would say, help people connect their personal values with your organizational values. There'll be more pride and better relationships. And back to our construction metaphor, the interior finish is attitude in the workplace. Here's another picture I took in Vietnam. This is a group of elementary school kids. I think I know who the future leader in Vietnam is from looking at this picture. Do you? And that is because there's one kid in there who just cannot contain his enthusiasm, his attitude. He's not going to worry about what everybody else is thinking. He's jumping up and down for joy and celebrating. I took this picture at the Atlanta airport. Southwest Airlines ad, all airline employees have attitudes. Ours just have the good kind. Southwest is using their reputation for positive employee attitudes to create a competitive advantage against United and Delta, which is based in Atlanta. And at a personal level, this is the most important decision your people will ever make. I love this statue by Bobby Carlyle, Self-Made Man. The hammer and the chisel that you use to carve the statue of you is the work that you choose to do and the attitude with which you choose to do that work. And you as a leader can have an incredibly positive impact on your people by reminding them the work you do, whatever it is important, not only for the patients we serve, but in helping you become the person you're meant to be. These two people have the same job, don't they? Same paycheck, same responsibilities. What's different is their attitude. Who do you think is happier? Dances with mops or mopes with mop? Who would you rather work with or live with? Who would you rather be like yourself? The most important decision any of us make every day, all day, every day. What is your attitude? Something happens. You're asked to do something. What's your attitude going to be? It's a choice that we make. And over time, attitude in your workplace will be defined by what you say you expect and what you tolerate. And what you tolerate will dominate over what you say you expect. Cy Wakeman, in her wonderful book, No Ego, said her research shows the average worker spends 2.5 hours a day on drama. We find pretty much the same thing with our culture assessment surveys. It is I believe, a leadership responsibility for you as a leader to create a workplace environment that is intolerant to toxic emotional negativity. When Bob Dent and I wrote an article for Nursing Management on everyday courage for extraordinary times, we interviewed people, and one of them was bullying expert Renee Thompson, and here's what she told me. You can be angry, frustrated, or scared, but you can't be cruel. We don't have time or energy to be anything other than our best selves, especially today. And I believe this is the bravest thing any manager can do. If you have the wicked witch in the workplace, the bully, the emotional vampire, you need to confront that person. And here's what happened in the movie The Wizard of Oz. Dorothy did. She throws water on the witch, and the witch is melting. And the soldiers standing around Dorothy are saying, "You killed her." And she apologizes. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to." And what do the soldiers say? "Hail Dorothy." And ding dong, the witch is dead. And I promise you that when you finally have the courage to confront that person who's sucking the life out of your workplace, your colleagues will thank you and ask you what took you so long. And it also has a huge impact on safety, doesn't it? Brand new surgical tech raises her hand in the operating room, says, "Time out, I'm not sure we caught everything." And the surgeon says, "Thank you for catching that." Is that surgical tech likely to do it again? You bet. Surgeon says, "You mean timeout?" Will that tech ever call a timeout again? Probably not. And as John Nance said, in applying the principles of aviation to healthcare, we need to put major emphasis on how people feel about our work and their relationship, not just the measurements, doing checklists and things like that. We have to work on the emotions, and that's creating that sense of personal accountability and responsibility. I want to share a simple promise that will change your life. It really will. And if enough people take it, it'll transform your organization, and it's the Pickle Pledge. I will turn every complaint, "My head is killing me," into a blessing, thank God for modern pharmacology, or a constructive suggestion. The first symptom of dehydration is a headache. I should drink some water. It has never been more important for us to focus on creating positive where the natural inclination would be negative, to create gratitude where there is resentment. And anytime somebody's complaining, what they're really saying is, "I'm resentful. Something I think I deserve, I don't get." To replace learned helplessness with initiative, and to replace self-centeredness with compassion. If you're complaining, you're focusing inward. When you start to look at blessings and think, what can I do to make things better? Instead, you're focusing outward and building a sense of compassion, softening your heart. And we're seeing people, this is a doctor's hospital in Augusta, Georgia, declare their workspace a pickle-free zone. I don't want to hear you're complaining. Take it to HR. They get paid to hear it. This is Children's Hospital New Orleans, where they have a pickle parade. They come around with a pickle cart. They are still doing this during the pandemic. People are wearing masks and everything's individually wrapped, but it was too important for them to stop doing. People are bringing in pickle jars and they fine each other. If you're caught bitching, moaning, whining, complaining, you're invited to put money in a jar. And all that money goes to a charity. Methodist Hospital in San Antonio, they raised over $7,000 for the HCA Hope Fund by turning complaints into contributions. And of course, the bigger impact is the impact on the culture when people become more aware of their own inner negativity and less tolerant of other people inflicting theirs upon them. This is Loma Linda University Medical Center, Murrieta, where I was just there a few weeks ago. I'll be back there again in June. We told them about this, and the chief of the medical staff, the guy on my left there, he had the medical staff created Pickle Squad T-shirts, and there you see him with his, and then on the other side, Peter Baker, the CEO of the hospital, and inside the big pickle there is their chief operating officer, and they're the first step to creating a more positive culture is often, in fact, I would say almost always, making people more aware of the negative. And I love this pickle jar. Be brave enough to start a conversation that matters. Nobody ever fixed a problem by complaining about it. Nobody ever helped somebody else be a better person by talking about that person behind their back. It takes courage to stop whining and actually do something, to stop talking about somebody and actually go talk to that person. But those courageous conversations are the only ones that make a difference. But remember the paradox I started with. The complaints we have today, they're real. People are facing significant challenges. It's going to be harder than ever for you to say, stop complaining, turn it into a blessing, because they're real, but it's also more important than it's ever been before for the mental and emotional and spiritual health of the people who are circling that emotional drain with whining and complaining, because basically you're proclaiming yourself to be a victim, and victims end up losing in life. So how do you build a culture of ownership? Jim Collins, the man who wrote Good to Great, Built to Last, many other great books, said you start by getting the right people on the bus. That makes sense intuitively, but I don't agree with it. Number one, if you have 20,000 or 2,000 or 200 employees, you can't just choose who you have on the bus tomorrow. Joyce writes a letter to God. Thank you for the baby brother, but what I prayed for was a puppy. If you have 2,000 or 20,000 people, you can't just throw the wrong people off the bus. Peter writes, please send Dennis Clark to a different camp this year. You know what? Until some manager has the courage to talk to Dennis Clark, he's going to show up again tomorrow. What you can do is make it the kind of bus that people are proud to be a part of. You do this, you create a culture of ownership, and you will be astonished at the number. I'm sure you've seen this in the last 2 years. The number of people who emerge as leaders, the number of people who you thought were really negative who have become really positive. You'll be astonished at how your culture helps to elevate people. But remember what I said at the beginning, culture does not change unless and until people change. And in the last webinar, I shared with you a tale of two hospitals. You may remember one of the most important question, in fact, in our validated culture assessment survey is this. On a 5-point scale, our culture does not tolerate bullying, toxic negativity, or disrespectful behavior. These are two hospitals in the same urban metropolitan area. They compete for the same caregivers, the same patients, the same donors. Hospital number 1, 8 out of 10 of their employees responding strongly agreed with that statement. Hospital number 2, 7 out of 10 did not agree, and almost nobody strongly agreed. Which hospital has higher patient satisfaction? And of course it's one. Which one has greater employee loyalty? One. Which hospital has higher nursing turnover? 2. Which one's healthier financially? 1. Which hospital has had the most bad press? 2. See, how people respond to that one question is a pretty good predictor of everything else. And you bring in a program to deal with HCAHPS without addressing this, and pretty soon the happy face pin is upside down and the book is on the shelf. But remember, culture doesn't change unless and until people change. I want to share with you the story of Kit Bredemus. These are 2 men who are the same man. That's Kit Bredemus. When we started working with Midland Memorial Hospital in West Texas, that's Kit with the arrow, Kit was the director of their emergency department. At the time, their ED patient satisfaction scores were in the bottom 10% of their comparison group. Their employee engagement was terrible. Kit himself was not healthy, not particularly happy, had a lot of goals unachieved. This is Kit 2 years later. This man and this man are the same man, except now Kit says he's half the man he used to be. He determined the only way he could begin to change the culture in his department was by his own example. And today, their patient satisfaction scores are consistently in the top 10%. Kit has been asked by Press Ganey to present at conferences, to write articles. When Bob Dent left to take a position at Emory Healthcare as CNO, they didn't have to do a search. Kit immediately moved right into that role. And by the way, the person, Dana, sitting on the other side from Kit, immediately moved up in his position. When you have a culture of ownership, really good things happen. This is Kit at the last AONE conference before they became AONL as the Young Nurse Leader of the Year. Kit now has a DNP. He's starting to work on a book. And all those things are great. But Kit will tell you that this is the real benefit, is that today the Kit before wasn't sure that he'd be there for his kids when they went to college and got married and when he became a granddad. He wasn't sure he was being a great role model. And Kit today is much more confident about those things. Culture does not change unless and until people change. And that is the essence of transforming leadership. Helping other people raise their own personal expectations, their own behaviors, become the people that they're meant to be. And so I want to wrap up with 5 strategies for building a more positive culture of ownership. And number 1 goes back to something I said earlier, in that the culture mapping schematic. Help people connect their personal values to the values of your organization. See, that it's sort of an intertwined dynamic. The number 1 reason people don't work out in a job, I believe, is because their values are not consistent with the lived and practiced values of their organization. And when people share a common set of values, they're much more likely to be successful. Kouzes and Posner, who wrote The Leadership Challenge, one of the best-selling leadership books, in another book they said, our research shows the more clear somebody is about their own personal values and vision, the more committed they're going to be to their organizations. See, it's organizational values, the words on the wall, accountability, excellence. They define what your strategies are, but it's personal values that shape your culture. And that's why you have to take that so seriously. When people share a common set of values, you don't need a lot of rules. I value integrity, so I don't talk about people behind their back, so you don't need to have a rule, and you don't need to have a carrot and a stick to prevent me from doing it. And here's the problem. Because of what I do at Values Coach, I have the opportunity to talk to a lot of people and ask this question. Tell me what your values are. And people don't know. People, especially in healthcare, intuitively have good values, but it is a rare individual who has actually written a statement of personal values, who actually thinks about it on a regular daily basis. And because people don't know, we tell them. We created a course called the 12 Core Action Values, and the workbook we use is called These Are Your Values. The first 6 values have to do with personal character strength, and the second 6 with making a difference, achieving your goals. And each value has 4 cornerstones that put action into the value. This is how seriously you should take helping your people live their values. One of the things that we've seen in our most successful projects, without exception, is that they have set aside a special place to teach values and culture. This is Midland Memorial Hospital, where they have a culture of ownership classroom, and they have the 12 core action values, the PICO pledge, the self-empowerment pledge, their hospital values prominently and attractively posted, and they teach classes about culture and values in that room. That sends a very powerful message that this is something we take seriously. This is important to us. These are our values coaches at Children's Hospital New Orleans. Not one of these people is a professional speaker. They are from environmental services, from nursing, from materials management, from the business office. There are some managers, there's some frontline people. The reason they're teaching this course is they're passionate about it. They've taken ownership for it. They're bringing their own stories into the classroom when they share it. And that's the second thing that we've seen in our most successful projects, is that it's not an outside consultant, it's not a top-down, it's an organic, we're all a part of this. This is how they teach the class at Midland Memorial Hospital. This was obviously pre-COVID. I have no idea what they're doing. I don't know what those strings are. See, they have made the class their own, and they're weaving their own stories, their own ideas, their own techniques into making the 12 core action values real. Strategy number 2, use rituals to reinforce personal expectations. We encourage people to have daily huddles, have a daily huddle in a main public area. Obviously, this is also pre-COVID. This is the CEO at Tri-County Healthcare in North Central Minnesota, getting his team together, and they start out every huddle with the PICO pledge, and then they do that day's promise from the self-empowerment pledge. And over time, the words start to sink in and people start to live them. I was at Midland Memorial Hospital again last week for the first time in over 2 years, and I got to sit in on their first in-person huddle in that period of time. I was astonished, proud, and impressed that every single person knew the PICO pledge, including the footnote, by heart. And then they did that day's promise from the self-empowerment pledge, and again, every single person knew that by heart. And I can go around the room and I can point to people. That person lost a lot of weight by being personally responsible, accountable, and determined. That person now has a doctoral degree. That person has changed their job to do something they love to do because they're taking these things to heart. Rituals have an incredible power to change people. You know, we used to have rituals for everything. One of the earliest marks of civilization, when archaeologists dig up graves from 4,000 or 5,000 years ago, what do they see? Evidence of rituals. And we've lost that. Now we have meetings. Reinstate, bring in new rituals to your organization. And related to that, practice stories. I mean, so many wonderful things have happened in the last 2 years, and we're probably forgetting most of them because we're moving so fast. Stories are the most powerful way of shaping culture and of telling the world who you are. Hewlett-Packard, one of the company that more than any other defined what it means to have a great culture when Bill Hewlett and Dave Packard started the company in their garage, which is now a national historic landmark. How did they shape it? They shaped it with stories. They called it Bill and Dave Stories. When I was at Stanford Business School, I worked at Hewlett-Packard, and I heard many Bill and Dave stories, even though Bill and Dave had been out of the company for decades at that point. And here's one I heard. One Saturday morning, Bill came in to do some work, and the cabinet that he needed to get into for his instruments had a lock on the door. He got a padlock, he cut off that lock, and he put up a sign saying, "We trust each other at HP. Never lock this cabinet again." That story rippled throughout that hospital faster than any HR policy ever could have done. I was hearing it decades later. What are the stories that capture for your organization? This is who we are. This is how we do what we do. It's one of my favorite new companies, 4Ocean. These are two 20-somethings, Andrew Cooper and Alex Schultz. And they built a company based on their story. They were surfing in Bali. They couldn't even get in the water because of all the plastic garbage. They went up to the lifeguard and said, "Can't you do something about this?" He said, "We took it all out this morning. This is just what's accumulated during the day." And instead of just whining about it, they started a for-profit company to take ocean garbage and turn it into wristbands. And they have an ocean club, Clean Ocean Club. If you're a member, and I am, every month I get the new wristband of the month. They have, as of this morning, cleaned 14 million pounds of ocean trash and turned it into usable stuff, beginning with those bracelets, and now they're branching out into other things. That story was the foundation of what is going to be a very successful company, and I think a model for the company of the future, where they care about something more than just making money. Strategy number 4, recognize and celebrate, find any excuse for a party. Back to Edward Hallowell. In his book about worry, he said, being connected with other people is the most powerful antidote we have to toxic worry at work. And what's the best way to get people connected? Celebrate. Anybody who's ever won a Daisy Award will tell you that was one of the highlights of their entire career. And anybody who's ever attended a Daisy Award will tell you that's one of the highlights of the day. And I'm a huge fan of Daisy. It's such an important thing. I love Mark and Bonnie. But there's so many other things that we could be celebrating every single day to give people a little jolt of positive energy. And that gets me to number 5, promote joy and fun in the workplace. Jim O'Toole wrote the book Leadership A to Z, and it's structured like a dictionary. And under C, he has the word cheerleading. And he says, why do so many leaders forget that cheer is a part of it, that you have to be a cheerleader? 2 Stanford professors recently wrote a book called Humor, Seriously. And they talk about the organizational power of humor, how it empowers us to take risks, to be bold, to bounce back. And when has it ever been more important and frankly harder for us to remember that we've got to have a sense of humor. We've got to be able to be willing to laugh. At Children's Hospital in New Orleans, we worked with them to help create their authentic, unique statement of core values. But then they created a statement of cultural philosophy building on that. And it's 4 pages long, but one of the key points is we play so our children can play, because they know that play and smiling and laughter is an important part of healing. And I will never forget my very first day at Children's Hospital 4 years ago. A little boy named Jeremiah had been there his entire life, 18 months. He had significant mental and physical challenges, and he was finally being adopted. And they escorted him all the way down to the main lobby with a New Orleans second line. They're waving their handkerchiefs. They had a jazz band playing. Mom and Dad are in the corner in tears. They will never forget that day. I will never forget that day. How do we create those kind of, and it didn't take that much time away from the job. How do we create those kind of experiences? This is Jamie Wiggins. He's the Chief Nursing Executive and Chief Clinical Officer at Children's Hospital in New Orleans with his senior team. This is what they do at work every day. Laissez le bon temps rouler. My French is terrible. Let the good times roll, and they take that stuff seriously. But you know what? It has showed up in their outcomes. When they were invited to present at the Children's Hospital Association Quality and Safety Conference, they called their presentation Proceed Until Apprehended, and look at that chart and the downward curve in serious safety events. Because, not in spite of, the fact that they make it fun. And strategy number 5, and this reiterates one that I talked about last time, but it's so important. Spark and fan an extravagant hope. The words of Eric Hoffer in his book, The True Believer. If you would change the world, or your corner of the world, or the culture of your organization, you must have the ability to give people not a positive hope, an extravagant hope. No matter what happens, we'll get through this. Relentless optimism coupled with relentless toughness, that is what extravagant hope is. It's the Stockdale paradox that Jim Collins popularized. Admiral Jim Stockdale was a prisoner of war in Vietnam, the longest serving POW. And I think of it as the microscope and the telescope. He said, we must face the brutal reality of our situation and not fool ourselves, but we must never lose hope in the ultimate success of our, in his case, being liberated from this prison. We've got to focus, we've got to be very real about the challenges facing us and not lie to people or everything's okay. We've got to be brutally honest with ourselves and each other, but never lose that hope that no matter what, we'll find our way through this. And this is my vote for the dumbest thing any CEO has said in the past 2 years. The CEO of Uber sent a message to every employee saying hope is not a strategy. Sure enough, but without hope, even the most brilliant strategy is going to fail. And your number one obligation as a leader is to give your people the hope that no matter what, you will find the strategy. In fact, hope can be a strategy in that context. You will find the strategy to work your way through it because there's no such thing as false hope. Take off the rose-colored glasses, but replace them with rose-colored binoculars and then help your team do the same thing. So let me wrap up with 2 things. One is what we have found to be the key success factors for positive culture change. Number 1 is solid, long-lasting commitment by the executive team. You must decide before you start something, this will not be a program of the month. We will counter every resistance. We know where we want to go and we're not going to quit. Number 2, engaging your middle management in an enthusiastic way. If your middle managers go to their people and say, this is going to be so great, this is a gift to you from our organization, it's going to be far more effective than if they go, well, here's another thing we got to do. And number 3, if 1 and 2 happen, you will see, as we have seen at Children's Hospital, at Midland and others, a growing core of dedicated spark plug people who wear their wristband for that day's promise every day, people who know the Pickle Pledge and take it to heart, people who embrace your values in a positive way. And eventually you get a whole new team and didn't have to change the people because they changed themselves. And honor the what's in it for me factor. Here's a real paradox. When CEOs talk to people and say, we are doing this and it's not about HCAPS, it's not about productivity, this is a gift to you. You're far more likely to get improved HCAPS, improved productivity, than if you go to people and say, we got to work on our HCAPS, here's a happy face pin, let's go to work. And let me wrap up with some concluding thoughts on leadership. And I shared some of these in the last one, but it's so important I want to reiterate it for those who are back with us, and thank you. Management is a job description. It's something you do. It's something that's on your name tag. It's in your job description. You're held accountable for it. Leadership is a life decision. Not one of these people is getting paid for working on a Habitat for Humanity home. You can't tell who the leader is. The leader's not being paid either. Leadership is seeing something that needs to be done and doing it. And in the process, you inspire and you influence the people around you. That, to me, is the best definition of leadership I know. A leader is someone who inspires, who influences other people. Management is what you do. Leadership is who you are. Management is limited to your time in the hospital or your office. Leadership is you 24/7, 365. Management expects compliance. It holds people accountable. Leadership seeks commitment. It wants people to take ownership. Management is transactional. It's EBITDA. It's spreadsheets. It's getting product out the door, getting bills paid. Those things are important. Leadership is transformational. It is helping people become better people. And the outcome, the byproduct, the trailing indicator is all of those transactional things get better. And in today's VUCA world, that's a military acronym for volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. You need leadership in every corner, not just in the corner office. Joel Barker said, a leader is someone who takes you to a place you didn't know you wanted to go. I like that definition because it implies creating a vision of that place. I didn't know we wanted to go there. But it also implies motivating, inspiring people to make the journey, even when it's hard, to get back up, even when they fall down. My definition is this. A leader is someone who helps you achieve goals you did not know you could achieve by becoming the person you did not realize you could be. There is a 100% probability that if you lead with values, you're going to change your own life in a positive way. 100% probability that if you lead with values, you're going to change the culture of your organization in a positive way. That is the ultimate leadership challenge. You know, I love this meme on the internet. The tabby cat looks in the mirror and sees the lion looking back. That's what leaders do. They help us see who we could be. They help us do the work to be that person. If we do that, the outcomes will take care of themselves. Back to the Stay Strong for Us project I mentioned earlier. Another of our contributors was Annette Kennedy, who is president of the International Council of Nurses based in Europe. And she said, and I quote, "We cannot wait passively for opportunities to improve nursing care and mitigate the challenges of COVID-19. We have to create them. We cannot wait to dream. We cannot wait to wish. We have to do it ourselves, and we can. Proceed until apprehended." Couldn't have said it better myself. So let me wrap up with homework. I'm going to you will get an email from the Association of California Nurse Leaders with the following. The ebook edition of The Heart of a Nurse Leader. My friend, colleague, and co-author Bob Dent, who is currently Chief Nursing Officer at Emory Healthcare in Atlanta, and I wrote this book. This is the heart. This is the right brain side of changing culture based on values, on personal values. It's an easy read. You can open it to any page and find something to be helpful to you. And this is the right brain side of it. I'm also going to send you our Cultural Blueprinting Toolkit workbook. And this has more than 40 exercises, including the culture mapping schematic that I talked about earlier, that can help you better define what your culture is. I'm going to send you a link and encourage you to go to staystrongforus.com, read the ebook, download the ebook, and share it with all of your people. It's all free, but these are messages of hope and courage and determination that we all need today. And finally, this is me. Feel free to contact me by email, call our office. I'm on LinkedIn typically once every day or so. If there are any questions, let me know. If there's any way that I can help you, let me know. So I want to thank Kim and Jacob and the team at the Association of California Nurse Leaders for having me today. I look forward to seeing you all in person in Disneyland for your annual conference next year. You know, these are the best of times and the worst of times. Let's focus on making the best of times. And so let me wrap up and see if there were any questions submitted. I know we're at the point that we're going to wrap up. So if you have questions, let's do this. If there were questions submitted, since we're at 3:30 my time, 1:30 your time in California, what I'll do is I'll take all the questions, I'll respond to them, and I'll send it along with the homework that's going to be sent out to you. So let me wrap up with the 3 most important words from this presentation, this webinar. Proceed until apprehended, because leadership does not require a management title. And in today's world, you need leadership in every corner, not just in the corner office. So thank you very much. Jacob, let me turn it back over to you.
Sure, great. Thank you so much, Joe. As Joe said, if you have any questions, you can feel free to email us at info@acnl.org, and we will pass the questions along to Joe, and then we will send out the materials he mentioned later today or perhaps tomorrow, along with the evaluation and recording link. Thanks for attending, everyone, and we look forward to seeing Joe next year at Disneyland. Have a great afternoon.